Chaitra ji. But some few words about him is he is a senior fellow Indian Studies for Unit of Education and Social Studies, that is CESS, and CESS Bangalore, and he is also advisor. Is director and fellow for Aarohi Research Foundation Bangalore, and the main thing is he is advisor for Awareness in Action, wherein from time to time he has been giving his valid advice and putting us in the right direction. Chaitra we welcome you for this
Thank you.
meeting. Yes. Sir, I would like to start. And I request all the audience who, if you are not able to hear, please switch off your video. Okay. And so that you can hear the audio based on your bandwidth. And please give your email ID in the chat box so that we will have your email ID in reference with us. Thank you all. Chaitra ji, please.
Okay, thank you, Madhvi. So what I will do is I will spend next about 35 minutes to 40 minutes about sketching a story about how do we look at healthcare practices and about what did we really learn from the current COVID pandemic, and that too specifically the kind of experience that we have from India in dealing with the COVID pandemic. And it's also part of a continuing engagement that we had with the Awareness in Action from the long time. We were bothered a few years back about how do we rethink globalization, in the sense that we are in the midst of something where you can't go back, and you don't want to say that we want to, we want to avoid all the international contacts. We don't want any scientific advancement. We are beneficiaries of it, but we also know that there are evidence of such a process. Now, one of the repercussions, the way mobile and the Zoom that we are using is product of the globalization. The current devastating COVID pandemic is also one of the gift of the globalization. Now, the infectious diseases have been there on this earth from time to time, and they have become epidemic, and they have created problem to the world at different points in time in the history. But the scale of morbidity and mortality that we are suffering is something that is unprecedented, that we have never witnessed such a kind of disastrous, devastating consequence, never in the human history. I mean, that is something that we are witnessing in last 1.5 years. Though allegedly an invisible creature, a virus, which is supposedly in biological term is a very mild kind of a virus, could create havoc to all kinds of things in the world. It not just only destroyed our healthcare and economic systems, but it has impact both culturally, sociologically, in an unprecedented way, unimagined way, the consequences of which that we have to see, in the long run. Now, see, today's talk is not even going to be about what are the consequences of COVID-19 pandemic and how do we really discuss about it. It is not even the debate between whether Ayurveda is great, allopathy is great, whether we should legitimize Ayurveda using this pandemic. None of this is going to be the argument. Now, people have dealt with this. People are in the middle of dealing with such a crisis that human history has encountered. And people have thought about a range of solutions. People have made their own attempts to deal with it. Governments are involved in it. There are failures and there are successes. There are huge technological innovations and advancement. But, India had done something phenomenally interesting and unique. And in this, what did Indians and how world looked at us? And is there anything that we can learn in terms of both institutional fights that have happened in India in terms of dealing with the management of the COVID crisis, medically speaking, and the way people spoke about it? Now, there is something extraordinary. If you look at from last 2 3 years, I mean, at least last, since the beginning of the 2020. Now, see, initially we were very complacent saying that coronavirus is not going to affect it. And there are various theories which are floated in the market saying that, look, there is extreme summer in India and virus will burn out. I mean, the Indians are not going to be affected. From there to saying that, see, Indians have higher level immunity. Can please people who have kept the audio open mute it? Can you please mute it?
Chaitra, I'm just muting everybody.
Yeah.
Unmute yourself once. Once and mute all. Yeah,
Yeah.
Chaitra, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah. Now I will get back. So now, see, in the beginning, when the COVID crisis entered India, when we started looking at it from last year of February, March period, people started thinking that, look, there is higher temperature and viruses wouldn't stay, given the kind of temperatures that India is going to suffer. It didn't happen that way. So many people said Indians, then as things progressed till the second wave. Now, one of the most peculiar things that people have been talking about is this, lower death rate per million population, which is astonishing. Even after this devastating second wave of the COVID, the numbers seem to be extraordinarily low. Can you mute them? It's quite disturbing. Yeah. So there is extraordinary number low. Now it was unbelievable for large number of Indians and also large number of people outside India. So there were attempts to say that in India the data is not available appropriately. Now it was a very complex set of argument in the sense that deaths rates are manipulated. Now there are two kinds of information that is available today through anecdotal experience. There are any number of cases where you could show that there is inflated numbers in India of the death rates. There are a lot of cases which are not COVID have been reported as COVID, but there are also cases where people have been trying to show that there is an increased death rate by looking at the data of the crematorium and some other places, that the death rate has been underestimated. Though nobody has done a serious statistical analysis of this overrating and underrating of the death report. Now, there is one-sided story that they want to present. Now, in that process, there are a lot of practitioners who came and announced, look, we can make the corona handle. So there are Siddha practitioners locally, there are traditional medical practitioners, and there are Ayurvedic practitioners who came with a series of remediations which came in. Now, there is a response from everybody, specifically scientific community and allopathic community, saying that, look, this is humbug. Now, you can't take it seriously. You're putting the lives of the millions of people into risk. And many people thought the scientists and the allopaths, what they are claiming is reasonable. But in the meantime, if you look at the ICMR guidelines, WHO guidelines, the way the protocols have been issued repeatedly. Now, if you look at it, earlier it was told that hydroxychloroquine was some kind of a panacea to the problem that you have. And suddenly you see hydroxychloroquine disappearing from the scene. And suddenly, plasma therapy became part of the protocol. Now, plasma therapy has been officially dropped because people found it as not useful. Now, then remdesivir was something that was sold. Now, suddenly now you discover in India that remdesivir is actually a wrong solution because the steroid leads to decrease of immunity. In fact, it has been officially dropped from the ICMR protocol. And also it has been advised because there is black fungus problem. Yeah. Apparently there is some kind of a, spread of the post-COVID infection of some of this because of the remdesivir usage. Now, if you look at the way when Alopath said the Ayurvedic people have no principles to explain, we can't understand what they are saying. We all were convinced, we had no objections. But if you look at the kind of medical recommendation and the modifications of the protocols that have happened, I don't see what is that reasonable ground on which these decisions were taken. Now, they are as, flimsy as they are alleging it on Ayurveda. Though whether the Ayurvedic claims were flimsy or not is a different issue. We will take and come back to that point. In that sense, there is a point that has been told now that it is very clear that, see, you can't trust Ayurveda, you can't trust Siddha, you can't trust any of these medicine traditional healing practices because you don't know how do they function. There is no evidence. Now, you can't deal with it. Okay, let's buy that argument to start with. But can we really look at this? Look at the allopathic system. Now, a large number of people during the middle of the coronavirus, it's a viral infection, they were giving bacteria, antibacterial treatment. Antibiotics were prescribed. Now, why were they giving it? We have no clue. What to do with it? Why these prescriptions were given? Were they based on some kind of rational assessment? A large number of people, got into the kind of defense of why such a defenses were given. And most of them are as unreasonable as our Siddha practitioners, as our Baba Ramdev was, the loose cannons who were speaking. And they were not very different from the medical community. Though there was some big claim about how the antibodies function, what is the nature of immunization. For example, a large number of doctors have told that Indians have higher immunity. Now, see, one other thing is it could be a general speculation. Can we really measure? Can we really show quantitatively what is the nature of the immunity, this percentage higher immunity that Indians have versus this? No, it is not possible, because the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is actually hitting all of us, is completely new virus to human system itself. It doesn't matter whether you're European or an Indian, etc. None of us have no experience of dealing with this virus. It's absolutely a new zoonotic process. So it has come. There was a jump. Now, why this jump happened, etc. I'm not interested in debating that. So this, and then came up with this theory for a large number of, for example, medical experts have said that Indians are doing better because they have poor hygienic practices. Now, it is very puzzling what it means to talk about poor hygienic practices. It's unclear. Now, because in that surroundings, there is this open defecation is there is something else is there, etc. But if you really want to make the comparison of the personal hygiene practices, let's say of Europeans and Indians, I mean, the answer would be pretty straightforward. Who is more hygienic in terms of taking care of the personal hygiene? Now, the most important part, now keeping aside these differences, one thing is very clear. Varsha, can you mute the audio? Varsha, can you mute the audio, please?
Okay. Sir, I'm muting everybody again.
Yeah. So coming back to the point, if you look at these claims, one side already we started noticing that allopathy and scientific community and so-called rationalists could actually pass judgments about the traditional practice. So there was comments about, some people applying the cattle dung on their body, and there was, mockery of the Gomutra and mockery of all kind of claims that was made by the Siddha practitioners, etc. I mean, all of us bought over this. Yeah, there is no evidence. This is not proper. But if you look at the kind of initiative that was taken, and when others raise this question, no, this can be scientifically justified, but on what rational ground was unclear. But the story doesn't stop here. See, this is not the dispute between, I'm not interested in saying there is a politics of superiority of allopathy versus Ayurveda, etc. I mean, this is not my point to really push. Now, I want to go further and point out now from here to take you towards certain important things. Now, one of the very important claims in the early phases of the corona infection, it was told to us that a larger population, over 30% of the total population, if it gets infected by the COVID, and it appears that there will be possibility of herd immunity in the population. Now, this is a standard textbook story that we know from epidemiological texts. Somebody is a biologist, they would know about it. It was told. Now, in the month of January, in Journal of American Medical Association, JAMA, published a study which was funded directly by the central government on Karnataka. They conducted serological analysis of the urban population and rural population. Okay. Now, what did they discover? So there was something like around 3 lakh plus cases were reported by August 2020 in the state of Karnataka. And the serological estimates show that around 300 million population, or something like 3 crore population, which is roughly around 46% of the total population of Karnataka, was infected by the COVID, by the serological analysis. Almost close to 50% of the population of Karnataka it seems, was infected by the COVID cases by the serological assay. I'm not criticizing the study. I'm only pointing what the top medical journals in the world published and what are its repercussions on how do we think about these problems. Now, if it were to be the case, then one would have theoretically expected that Karnataka is closer to 50% of the population being infected. Okay? It should have been very closer to achieving herd immunity, if not fully achieved the herd. Now, if you look at the number of cases in the second wave, the number of deaths, and the kind of scarcity of oxygen that was created, that happened in Bangalore because of the influx of the number of cases in Karnataka, basically. Now, there was not even a remote possibility of herd immunity by looking at the second wave impact. That was happening. So therefore, the question is that these predictions and assessments that we had, that, if you infect 30% of your population, then probably you would expect a herd immunity to happen, doesn't seem to be working. Now, there are more interesting data. Now, what did they find? Now, it looks like urban population has affected more in serological assay than the rural population. Within urban population, if you look at, there is more impact on the slums in the urban areas than the other places. But if you distribute the deaths where the deaths happened, it appears that the slums and the rural regions have seen the lesser deaths as opposed to the urban educated populations. Now, these trends are telling us something very different. Now, one of the very important things that the paper makes a claim is to say, look, now these are asymptomatic cases of corona. So therefore, they had no effect, it came and it went off. So now one could raise this question, why is that there is so much of asymptomatic cases that are coming in the serological assay as they were claimed? Now, there is something extraordinary that was happening in Karnataka and other southern Indian states that I know of very well. That these people after corona, the corona instructions were given, though they were instructions which are medical in nature, in the sense that you wear mask. I mean, except for hospitalization and whatever tablets you give, basic principle is what? You maintain social distancing, you wear mask, sanitize your hands. Now, for a large population of Karnataka and southern India, it was actually not a very difficult job to do it, except that they didn't get into the mask business. I mean, except for the sickness. Now, they became utterly precautious because, one, these practices were part of their daily life, their ritual life. It's just that more and more educated, we started losing these practices, and it was very easy for them to go wash their hands, keep themselves clean, and they went back. What is more interesting is they went back to the medicines that they knew earlier. No, they didn't know how to deal with corona. But every place you go in India, specifically in rural and slum areas, etc., where the allopathic medicine would wanted to sort of write it off, saying that these are asymptomatic cases or bad hygienic practices or higher immunity. But what these people were doing in terms of adaptation to this new changing situation, there was phenomenal response in terms of how they were dependent on their traditional memory of what kind of kashaya, kada, what kind of inhalation practices. For instance, how to use turmeric along with the floor of the Rocky, turmeric powder, and how to use charcoal for it and do some kind of inhalation, and how to keep yourself clean. All the traditional practices have come back. You enter your house from the back door. You don't enter your house without washing your legs and hands. I mean, you just maintain, and even if somebody comes from city to the villages, you basically isolate them for next about 10 days. I mean, these are certain things which are very easy for these people to get adapted to. And everywhere it has been a very known phenomenon to the middle class, lower class population in southern India if you travel. I'm sure it will not be an exception in North India. That you go, they don't offer you tea and coffee. Now they will start offering you some kada, some kind of kashaya. This has become their daily hygiene. And now, if their neighbor get corona infected, they immediately started going. In Karnataka, for example, I can tell you, there is this Dr. Giridhar Kaje medicine. And suddenly all Ayurvedic practitioners for their patients, They started prescribing 1 month take Mahasudarshan Ganavati. Everywhere, everybody was taking Mahasudarshan Ganavati as precaution. Now, these are certain practices which are running very, very seriously in this population. Now, even Baba Ramdev's kit that people were using, whatever may be the evidence available, now it had this Anu Taila, Shadbindu Taila, and some of these Tailas which were used. And people became extremely sensitive in dealing with it. And these were completely new kind of adaptive practices, which were based on the kind of memory that they had from their traditions. And they started going back. In fact, instead of focusing on what were these people, if the data is true, saying by August 2020, 46% of Karnataka population was serologically was infected, by the COVID infection. That's what serological study has been showing us. If that were to be the case, the next immediate question would have been all those people who have not come to hospital, who have not been tested positive officially through the testing. We should have gone and said, what is that in their life has changed? What is this adaptation that they are doing? None of us have gone and done it. I mean, it was not an important point, simply washing it off, saying that this is asymptomatic cases. Why is that it is so unique to India that you have extraordinarily large population being asymptomatic? Why is that there is extraordinary lower death rate? Instead of spinning another ad hoc theory of saying poor hygiene or something else, where most of these theories which were spun over the last 1.5 years have been proven to be unreasonable. They do not explain what is happening. Even in the second wave, when there is so much of devastation that is happening, despite that we have the lower death rates. What would explain that? And even assuming that all international media claims that India's cases are underreported. Now, assuming that to be true for the sake of argument. Now, these people are surviving, whereas people are dying in other parts of the world. Now, how do you make an account of it? Now, one of the striking features of this glaring distinction for the lower death rate, and many people, for example, I know personally a large number of people, they were for sure, if they would have gone for the test, they would have diagnosed COVID. What did they do? They simply shut it. They came in contact with somebody who had the COVID, or they got fever, they realized it's going to long live, there is respiratory problem, it looks more like they just shut them down. They isolated themselves. They went for series of prescriptions. What varieties of prescriptions were given? The Siddha doctors, Ayurveda doctors, they managed how many number of cases? Now look, what is our response? For instance, when in the midst of the, in Karnataka, for instance, in the midst of the COVID surge in the second wave. So there was an industrialist who immediately was told basically that if you put certain lemon drops, if there is so they all of them had bought the oximeters. They were monitoring their oxygen level, and if the oxygen level goes down, and one of the things that they found that if you put the lemon drops, that you will have half an hour irritation, and kapha comes out, and the oxygen levels shoot up. And what did this industrialist say? He didn't say that this is a remediation for COVID. He said, I am going to tell this and spread this to people. If there is oxygen scarcity, our hospitals do not have beds, we don't have enough oxygen supply, this could be used. And mind you, my own colleagues, for instance, a large number of them, at least about 12, 13 of them, tried this. And it worked for them. Now, what is that? Ramchandra Guha writes, for instance, in Wire and Telegraph about how superstitious Indians are in the time of COVID. In that, one of the important points that he criticizes, because Vijay Sankeshwar happened to be the associated with BJP, it gets connected to Hindutva and fascism, and therefore there are deaths. Now, there was one alleged case of death because of that, lemon, drops into the nose in one small area in Karnataka, one case. And after postmortem, it was shown that he didn't die because of the lemon drop. Okay, he died because of some cardiac arrest. So it was very clear, diagnosed, and this story gets sold as a case against Ayurveda. Now, why it is important? Now, mind you, my interest is not to show that this is a fight between Ayurveda and allopathy. No, that's not the point. It will get clarified in next few minutes that why I am making this point. Now, one of the very important point is that for some reason or the other, there is this tendency that I wanted to emphasize that there is a particular way in which Indians have been responding to this pandemic, which is devastating. And with all the morbidity, with all the mortality that Indians are suffering, no doubt, they're very bad. We have never witnessed such bitter, mortality rates and morbidity. People have lost lives. But the way that we have performed is better than the way in the most advanced countries. Best of the healthcare situation exists. They couldn't perform this way. Now, this is a very striking point. Now, why do you want to have, see, what is called a strong healthcare system? A strong healthcare system is the one which will come to your rescue when you needed it the most. Now, look at take the case of Italy, take the case of France, take the case of UK. They are supposedly having the best healthcare system. And when does it not help you? It helps you when you needed it the most. Now, we have the worst healthcare system according to the assessment of the healthcare. Any healthcare pundit will tell you that India have a very bad health infrastructure. You don't need to, you don't need a greater evidence to say. I mean, everyone knows it. We have a bad health infrastructure. Now, we have higher density of population. We have higher population, but we also are very crowded in the sense we have high density of population. So we have multiple disadvantages when there is a pandemic coming. Now they have low density population. They have lower population. The most advanced and the best healthcare system is in place. Now they have devastating mortality and morbidity. Though we do have it, we have unbelievably lower rates for the mortality and morbidity rates. Now, how do you say this is some kind of a miracle? This is asymptomatic cases. Really? Is that what is the explanation? It could not be the case. It appears like an exception from the story. It cannot be, and it is not an exception because something else is happening. Now, what we are unable to recognize is what is that something else is happening in our midst. Because the people, much more than what governments could do, people have been responding as a culture, are responding in a particular way. Now, what we are trying to do is that we are not even focusing your attention to what is that which is being done other than whatever the revamping of the healthcare infrastructure the government has been doing. Government might have committed errors, government might have done something bad, and they did have done something bad. I mean, why should we not say that? I mean, they did. But that doesn't mean that, they are the enemies of the people. I mean, they tried their best with the 135 crore population. Whatever they could do, they do. There is an adaptive response about which there are limitations to talk about. In this process, there was a tussle. Now, what was the tussle? A large number of Ayurvedic people claim that, look, we have the medical solution to deal with this, if not as a solution to coronavirus, but as precautionary, preventive. We have some offer. And it was very difficult for them to get legitimate recognition from Ayush and ICMR. And there was also conflict between the Ayush department, which is meant for Ayurveda, Siddha, Unani, and all these alternative systems, and the ICMR. And what was the nature of the claim? Look, it is not evidence-based. So what should they do? Now, some of the people tried attending, they actually created this isolation quarantine facility. They actually tried calling a large number of Ayurvedic people and say, you actually stick to the standard protocol and demonstrate the evidences to prove that Ayurveda functions for this. Now, multiple times Ayurvedic doctors were called. There was an attempt that is being made. Now, Ayurvedic doctors, for some reason or the other, could not achieve it the way that they were supposed to achieve it. Now, why was it the case? Now, this is the most central part of the technical part of my argument. Now, is that one of the things that they were asked is that there are protocols which have been established by 150 years of experience that allopathy has developed, and they wanted Ayurveda to offer the kind of evidences, the way that they think that this is how you establish the proof and evidence, you offer them. See, one of the difficulties, see, you must remember there are extraordinary problems in this, and this problem, because we have not given attention.
1 second, Chaitra, I'm meeting her. Chaitra, please.
Yeah. So there is a history to this particular kind of story of the way that our traditional structures have difficulty in understanding. And allopathy also has some great difficulty in understanding this system. And I think we need to focus about it and then come back to learning and policy, etc. How do we think about it? Now, I wanted to just begin with the stories of the 1700. I will take one example. I will not have enough time to talk about history of biology and history of science for a longer period. Now, if we go back to 18th century, 1600, 1700s, if you go. Now, when British were coming here, they were doing the company transactions. Now, there was something phenomenal that they observed. They found that for smallpox, there was a universal inoculation program that was available, and British noticed it, something very peculiar. In British, they didn't have this inoculation program. And there was something in the company, Comptroller General of Vaccine Program. So somebody who comes there, who actually looks at data and try to push these arguments. He was somebody who was in charge in the colonial administration in Turkey. He comes here and he looks at what is happening in India. He comes and builds a strong case in the British Parliament, saying that we must actually start thinking of, this is a common global problem, we must start thinking of the inoculation program. Now, one of the response that he receives at the time, one, see, look, this is a pagan practice. This is barbarians. These are the people, superstitious people. They make this practice. There is no way on this earth we can take it. Number one. Number two, now you should not allow them. You should transform them. This is bad. Because there is no clear-cut theory or there is no clear-cut doctrine to explain what this process is. Now, what did they observe? A range of people, most often they're Brahmins, from Varanasi to Bengal to a whole range of other places. And they will start traveling from the month of February to the whole place. Now, they will go to every house, untouchable, no untouchable, nothing of that kind. They will go and they inoculate people because this smallpox was a problem that used to come between April to June. And it was massive, national level, kind of an inoculation program, but there was no state coordinated program. These are certain set of people who went and inoculated people. Now, you know what happened? This is unreasonable. How can they do it? This is one, against the Christian belief. Second, it has no foundation. And this is some kind of a magic, traditional kind of a thing. Therefore, in Bengal presidency, they abolish the inoculation program when they came to power. Now, there was a consequence to it because the vaccination program was abolished. Now, there was eruption of the cases. So in 1760s onwards, you would know that there was already an alternative. Some of these stories traveled to Europe and there was a new inoculation that was developed. So there is a biology, modern history of vaccine, one would know. And they bring it and install it in the population of Bengal. And it creates huge mortality when compared to the inoculation that was here earlier. Now from that day also, now one of the complaints, where is the evidence that it works? What is the foundation? There is no evidence. This cannot be proven. There is no theory. These complaints which we see today on our traditional practices are still the kind of practices. And now what do they want? They wanted a redescription of these practices in terms of what theories and structures which are all there. Now, Ayush and the ICM, they have guidelines to establish, validate a particular drug. There was a reference to validation, etc., molecular characterization, etc. Now see, there is a difficulty and danger in doing this because there is something which is incompatible between these two systems at this point in time. To give you an example of what is the philosophically, technically difficulty that is associated with it is, if you look at historians of science, when they looked at how science developed, how knowledge developed in the modern natural sciences, one of the phenomena that they recognize is that if there are two theories work on the same object, even though they work on the same object, when they talk about it, they don't understand each other. To give you an example, in Copernican revolution, around the time when Copernicus was functioning, he was establishing the heliocentric theory. Before that, there was a geocentric theory that Europeans developed. Now, they had same objects. There was Sun, there was Mars, Earth, Moon. These are the objects of astronomy which was common between both the groups, the Copernican and the pre-Copernican groups. They were there at the same time. Now, for one group, Sun was a planet. For another group, Sun was a star and Earth was a planet. So is Mars and Venus. And Moon was not a planet. Though they were talking about Earth, though they were talking about Sun, though they were talking about Moon and Mars, but in terms of the scheme, the kind of concepts through which they were talking about these objects were very different. So even though both of them were talking about planet, what planet means to pre-Copernican theories and what planet means to Copernican and post-Copernican world were very different, even though both of them talk about planet. Because for pre-Copernicans, Earth was not a planet. In the Copernican scheme of thing, Earth is a planet. And this particular problem is labeled as problem of conceptual change in scientific knowledge. It is also labeled as problem of incommensurability. It is also labeled as problem of theory change, etc., etc., etc. Now, you come back and look at our traditional forms of medicine. One, the goal and the conceptual scheme within which these medicinal systems have been organized. Now, you go to an Ayurvedic doctor. They talk about Prakriti, Kapha, Pitta, Vata. Whole range, series of conceptions. They talk about Ushna, Shita, right? Vayu. I mean, this all of us understand. As Indians, we know. For example, you eat aloo, it leads to Vayu. It doesn't make any sense allopathic. Right? And you have a completely different set of theories and ideas to talk about what constitutes medicine in modern medicine. Or what level, what constitutes. So therefore, they are completely incompatible system. See, modern medicine can very easily draw its resources from neurology, psychiatry, psychology, animal physiology, human physiology, and all these disciplines and build into a system. Same way, Ayurveda could draw itself from a whole range of other systems. Now, there is an absolute incommensurability between these two kind of sentences. Therefore, even though they talk about the same object, the same disease, same kind of a problem, one, they are not compatible because there is something called problem of, conceptual change. There is problem of incommensurability. There is also the problem of, theory change. I mean, a whole range of things. I mean, now we could make it richer. We need to study it. We have not given this attention. We are now trying to redescribe without even giving attention. Can these two be clubbed? See, our way in which we are taking these health systems so ridiculously, because there are a lot of popular talks you would have heard. So the Dalton's atom and the Kanada's atom are the same. No, they conceptually belong to completely different groups. Now, this public talk and this conversation of Ayurveda and allopathy that we have been, these validation procedures, etc., that we have been trying to do is simply incompatible here. Therefore, what we are left with, now look at these two systems. One, for most of the Indians, as consumers of the end users of this health product, now we have absolutely no problem in going and getting vaccinated. But we also know that, what kashaya that we must take, what precautionary Ayurvedic medicine we all depend on. Where what not to take, there is some kind of a clarity that as end users we. But in terms of examination and showing demonstrable. For example, in case of herpes, in case of jaundice, in most of these complicated cases, which allopathy had great difficulty in dealing with it. Now we know where to go and they solve it. You're very sure. You're almost 100% sure that you go there, your problem gets resolved. We have that mechanism. Whole of India manages. And a lot of people have written about it. Even journals like Lancet have pointed out. For instance, one of my colleague, Dr. Kishore, who is from Ayurveda, but he also knows modern medicine. He's a professor at Nibhans now in Bangalore. He himself, along with other collaborators, wrote a paper in Lancet, which showed that why, for instance, is even if you create more psychiatric infrastructure in India, why people do not want to come to psychiatric infrastructure in the allopathic practices. Because they are far more clearer on solution to some of their psychiatric interventions in these alternative systems. And they don't find those solutions available. And if you go to psychiatry, you run into all kinds of other complications. So they're very clear that they don't want to go there. And even a large number of psychiatrists, for instance, would want to, sit and chat with them. They will talk to them. And a lot of their psychiatric problem goes not because of any modern psychiatric intervention, but they send them with placebos and, spend a lot of time talking to them, etc. Now, nonetheless, coming back to this issue, I'm saying that these two medicines functions very differently. See, in Ayurveda, for example, all the Ayurvedic doctors, even in Siddha, for instance, they have their own texts, not necessarily in Sanskrit texts, but also in other regional languages, all kind of fascinating texts. And they actually create drug for a patient who is in front of you. So there is an individual customization of the drug depending upon whole range of parameters of assessment, which they draw from Charaka Samhita, Vagbhata Samhita, Sushruta Samhita, and whole range of other Prayoga Samuchaya. I mean, hundreds of texts which are available. They use them and they create one kind of text. That's why when they start looking at pharmacopoeia, see in Ayurvedic, the way that they have organized their chemical components, the plant resources, animal resources, which is used for drug production, it looks quite hilarious for others to understand. Because there is very interesting, for instance, there is such a deep reflections that have happened. For example, from which region you are coming decides on what plant and what leaves should go in preparation of a particular kashaya. Therefore, Ashokarishta, in Kerala and Ashokarishta in Karnataka, Ashokarishta in North India, do not have the same chemical compositions. And they cannot. And the pharmacopoeia is organized in such a way that depending upon what is available, and they have taken into, one could give an account, chemically speaking, there is different phenology, there is phytochemistry, etc. These things were taken, seasonal variations are taken, and based on that treatments are decided. The whole range of practices which are available. That's why the most comprehensive system that is available to intervene people based on the one, you look at human body with certain conceptions and you use their body to deal with, to take them towards some kind of happiness. And there are a whole range of situations have been created. Now, to supplement that, you have this yoga, pranayama. In fact, one must know the kind of amplification in the yoga practitioners that have happened in this period. Pranayama. The people 2 years back when we used to go and tell them that pranayama is a very important part, nobody used to bother. Now everybody, there are people who can teach me how to do Kapalbhati now. They come and tell us how to do Kapalbhati, how to do different kind of pranayama. This is precisely the kind of things that people have suddenly discovered. And they are very useful and they were time-tested material. But one of the difficulties is because of the incompatibility in these two different kinds of programs, the modern medicine and this. Now, one of the demand that we have is to validate Ayurvedic drug using the standards and the procedures that you think are most reasonable with respect to what allopathy considers is the most important part. Now, there is difficulty that I gave you example, that there is extraordinary variation in the very nature of sutras as such that, one could arrive at multiple combinations of drugs given the kind of person you have. But whereas allopathy would want to sort of generalize, you create, so you have fevers, paracetamol. Now that kind of a formula is very difficult to arrive at because there is a different approach to look at human body, human physiology itself in this alternative way of looking. Now what is happening today? Now we are forcing this one Ayurveda is under tremendous answer. I gave you one example of how, for example, the massive inoculation program, which was already practiced for smallpox, was crashed. We can go on discussing how many number of medical practices have been completely eradicated because of the colonial intervention. They were completely destroyed, throttled completely. And now they were fixed with the Sanskrita departments. The Vandanaji had pointed out very appropriately that there is hardly any growth. That and the states, so now state wants to really dictate terms in terms of how it should be institutionally managed. Now this brings us to another complicated issue of saying modern state functions in a particular way. The modern state that we have is a product of Europe. It's a Christian state. It evolved from Christian theological background, and it allows certain ways of doing things, and it does not allow certain ways of doing things. Now, the modern state actually demands the modern state actually demands you to follow all this traditional system to fall in line with certain rules and regulations. So now think about this case. Now take the case of Anandaya that was being pointed out in Andhra Pradesh. Now, thousands of people are coming and taking medicine for COVID. And he comes, he has been giving medicine. He's a time-tested man. He comes. And who are the people? All these major politicians, all these police officers, bureaucrats are actually coming in line and getting this medicine, and they're finding it happen. In Karnataka, Giridhar Kaje simply went and distributed. One of the ministers in Karnataka, when he was announced, as COVID, he went, okay, COVID positive came. He simply called up this doctor. What should I do? Doctor said, don't take Roshin, don't do any of this. I will tell you. He sent him the medicine. He simply sat there 7th day and he came out perfectly fine. After 8 days, he came out. Now, these are, they were dealing with these patients in this way. There are any number of cases, people, they got diagnosed. Say, for instance, in Bangalore, BBMP comes and gives them the kit, which carries some kind of medicine. They will all take it. They won't even open it. They have a whole range of people telling them what medicine to buy, where to buy. They literally get that. Now, there are organizations, NGOs, which have actually created a pack of those Ayurvedic drugs and they give, and people come out much faster with less side effects. Now, this is what is the experience of the people which are there available. Now, this doesn't mean that all complications could be handled with Ayurveda. That's not my provocation. Now, one of the difficulties is that if this is what they experience, now why should this experience of individuals getting treated by another legitimate form be denounced as it is not evidence-based? Now, did we ask this question? What it means to sort of ask an Ayurvedic drug to be validated? Okay, there were some kind of broken traditions, etc. They have to develop. How much we have invested in thinking about it? Now, what we wanted to do is we simply wanted the entire Ayurvedic pharmacopoeia rewritten to suit what modern medicine demands. If you do that, so one of the complaints, for instance, we have on Ayurvedic medicine is it is not standardized. Of course, it is not standardized in the sense, depending upon whether you are preparing it in Kerala or Maharashtra changes its chemistry. It has to, because latitude is different, altitude is different, the leaf chemistry is different, stem chemistry is different, phenology is different, slope and aspect is different. Yes, of course. And practitioners know how to calibrate them and create the drugs. They have been doing it. What you are trying to do? You are trying to say all, for example, Ashokarishta, Dashamularishta, Vishwagandharishta, all companies, you wanted to standardize this is the chemical composition. No, it is not possible. Because if you want to transform Ayurveda into that way, Siddha practices into that way, you are actually destroying the very experiential knowledge that they carry. And they're successful precisely because using this, they literally know how to customize this for individual people. Now, instead of strengthening this knowledge, because it's knowledge which has been transmitted, systematically reflected, they've thought about it. There are texts which talks about it. Of course, we have to do from Ayurveda side, Siddha side, they have to do a lot of work in the sense they have to theorize it. They have to bring it into the language of 21st century. We should talk about it. We should also create compatibility with the health system, which is there, modern system. I mean, we
Yeah,
need modern
Chaitraji,
system.
a small
Yeah,
time check.
yeah.
Yeah.
So with the modern, we need to bring it into the modern system. We need to make it compatible. We need to develop that system, because allopathy itself cannot attend to all the healthcare demands that is there in the world. What we need is, for human happiness, we need much larger systems of medicines to come together and think about what constitutes health. Because if you say whatever we called so far as the best healthcare system, if it crumbles at the point of time when it has to respond, now there is something we need to think about. We need to rethink what it means to talk about healthcare. Is it hospitals, costly equipment? Third, now most important part is that you empower people to use this medical knowledge. Now allopathy forbids you from doing it. You need to always go back to the experts to get it, and it is very difficult to sustain such a system, because when you have crises, you need huge investment to maintain the system. So imagine, for instance, in India, every district headquarter, you wanted to bring in all kinds of technology. I mean, the amount of money that you have to pay. So I will just take another 2-3 minutes to just wrap up. Now, one of the things earlier, if you look at earlier historical data, for example, WHO was always puzzled. In India, why are these people not coming to medical stores to buy this tablets like L-Dopa for diarrhea? They used to have constant problem in tropical area. Now, one of the things that they had, one of our friends conducted a survey, that each jati, depending upon the kind of food practices they have, their own ganji preparation. In Karnataka, they came up with a recipe of some 600 odd, ganji preparations. And that used to manage themselves. Why should they go to hospital? They never went. It's only recently that it has come. Second, there is extraordinary experiential knowledge which is situated in the ritual worlds of Indians. Now, in case of COVID adaptation, one of the very important things that has happened in the rural area, even in the slums, where apparently there is higher incidence by serological study, deaths are very low, morbidity is very low, because this adaptation, one is in terms of maintaining the hygiene, maintaining the contact, etc. They draw it from their ritual resources, the culture that we have. We have enough memories. We have handled cholera, we have handled plague, we have handled all kinds of problems, and these memories are very deep in us. So therefore, if this is what what is alleged alternative medicine was something that has helped these people to cope up with the crisis that we have, instead of denouncing them as some kind of bad hygienic practices, etc., what really exactly happened? What was these people are trying to think? Now we need to raise this question, because world has to know this. Because there is something that, because it is not just about Indians, it's human knowledge. And it is something that we need to develop in such a way that it becomes shareable to other parts of the world. Third, we shouldn't force Ayurveda to change itself entirely, foundationally, to fit into validation program and make it into some subpart of modern medicine. That's why I am not in favor of using these words like integrated medicine. Integrating with what? And then you have this medical pluralism. What is this medical pluralism about? Basically, prove yourself in terms of allopathy. No. If there is a case where clear-cut way of handling people, if you don't have theory, let's try to create a structure in such a way that we make it cognitively sensible. I think we should use this COVID crisis as an extraordinary situation to look at how multiple possibilities that we have to think about health, which includes allopathy to all other forms of medicine. And let's enrich and build knowledge of health about human beings so that we can build a better healthcare system. Now, this is the plea, but this is not the debate on saying whether Ayurveda is greater or allopathy is greater. Now, we need people to have better health. That dictates standard of living, quality of life, a whole range of other parameters. Therefore, we need to get away from this colonial mindset that I was saying. That one side you can very easily wash out, saying these are all superstitious, traditional, etc. Another side, whatever joking, even Asian Paints is antibacterial, IMS certification. Oh, come on. And this is sold as science. And there is some very rational diagnosis that is happening, and you sell it as superstition. You don't even understand what it means to talk about superstition. Now we need to get out of these glitches. So therefore, now in order to think about the alternative models of healthcare, which includes all forms of experiential knowledge, theoretical knowledge, medical knowledge that are available practices, one, we need to get out of the colonial problems, colonial descriptions of this world. Second, new kinds of research. This is not about writing another policy document where some bureaucrat will sit and write section 1, section 2, section 3. No, that is not. Precisely because it was done, we are speaking in a very way Ayurvedic doctors cannot validate their products. These people simply speak. They're very superstitious. They're very religious, mysterious, etc. We need to get out of it and rationalize it because it works. It has worked. And if you don't show this, what you're doing is not just you are denying yourself what is happening in front of you, you're also denying the world the knowledge about it. Whether the world wants to take it or not is not my concern, but we wanted to show this. It's very important. This is how we cope up with this. Now, I can go on and on this, but I would sort of wrap it up at this point in time. And let's have some question and answer and think about further. But mind you, before you attack me on any set of question, I mean, this is something is a very sweeping kind of a summary that I was trying to make. How do we think about some of these issues? And this is something that we must invest, because this when COVID is happening, this is where we need to really see what we are doing and learn from it instead of simply calling it superstition, dogmatic, that there's nonsense and allopathy is superior. We're wasting time. We should not be wasting our time in the dispute between Ramchandra Guha and Baba Ramdev. We should really think what is happening in this world. So that's my humble plea and submission. With that, please, let's open this for question and answer. Let's take the questions.
Thank you very much, Chaitra for your insight. I request the participants to please ask questions.